again back to apologetics, and we're talking about the universe. Little topic here. I gave you a list earlier of topics, things that we would be talking about, and origin, meaning, morality, destiny. Those are the questions that we have for them, for secular humanists. But then we can also talk about the universe and talk about the apologetics of what explains the origin of the universe or its existence. Cause is the most important part of this. The universe has to have a beginning. Beginning of time, beginning of space, beginning of matter. Now we've talked about Stephen Hawking postulating that there was time in another dimension. It would be like on a plane instead of on a line as we imagine it. And that there was a singularity, a unique event, and the crossing of two, what was it called? I remember it was amazing because one of the students in our class in Mexico looked this up. And the crossing of two membranes of reality, and that was what started the Big Bang and everything. But it's just, he's having to postulate, and he actually calls it imaginary time, because it's only in our imagination. There is no evidence for it other than if there is no God, then we have to invent something else. But then, what caused that cause? What created that time in another dimension? What started that? It still does not explain what the universe is, if it's eternally existent in some form or another, but we really have no hard evidence that it existed in any other form other than time, space, and matter. So it requires a personal cause, it requires a will in that sense. A lot of times when we're evangelizing, even with tribals, you have to start with creation, you have to remodel the world view, and you have to talk about how do we know that God created the world? Besides the Bible, there's the arguments of intelligent design. And this is very popular, very well known. Basically, how can you have a watch without a watchmaker? And that's just looking at the intricacy and the design of everything. It really is hard to believe that that came from nothing. And I think, or from simpler, less complex collections of molecules. Science, it really doesn't happen that way. It really doesn't happen that way. I mean, crystals collect in chemical reactions and form and such, and that gets fairly complex. But like the human eye or some organ of any animal is just, it's amazing how well it works and specifically it functions, and that's hard to believe that it just spontaneously generated in that direction to become that. So that's intelligent design. We see a design, and we could also talk about just the design of life, and not just what we see in the physical world, but what we feel and know as humans, that is a sign that there is a maker, there is a God, there is a personal God. Another one is just the very existence of the cosmos requires a beginning. A beginning requires a change from what wasn't or what was to something else. And that requires God. It's logic that brings us to that. Matter, space, and time. And I got to be honest, we have to explain where it all came from. And really explain how is time. I just saw an article by a British scientist who does these little videos on YouTube and explains why time is linear. And I love watching scientists really try and explain things like that on my level. It's always so very interesting to me, or even reading, like I said earlier, Scientific American articles, because there's just so much postulated there. It doesn't shake me in my faith anymore. It builds my faith, seeing real science and seeing how they try and explain things. But the universe exists. The very existence of the universe requires some things. And probably one of the most powerful arguments is that scientists accept the laws of thermodynamics. And the first law of thermodynamics is that neither energy nor matter are destroyed or created. They continuously exist in one form or another. And so you're going down the road in your car and you apply the brakes, and that the matter of your brake pad material squeezes against the rotors on your brakes, and that generates that motion, that energy, kinetic energy in motion, generates heat, and your brakes heat up. And they get so that you touch them, you're going to burn your finger. The energy changed form. It went from kinetic energy of the motion of the wheel going around to heat, and then that heat dissipates into the environment. An hour later you go back and you can touch your brakes and they're cool. Why? Because the second law of thermodynamics says that in a closed system, which would be the entire universe, disorder increases. Things fall apart. Those of us that have reached the age of 50 or more, we know this to be true. Entropy, things cool off. Your cup of coffee is going to cool off. It's not going to conserve the heat. Those molecules bouncing around in there, and all that motion in the liquid that makes it hot, it's not going to stay that way. You can have a thermal mug, it'll stay that way longer. But eventually it'll cool off. They don't heat up on their own either. They don't collect energy naturally, and energy isn't naturally come together. You may say, well, what about a human body? We're an open system because we're bringing in energy in the form of food and expending energy in the form of work. We're exchanging energy and matter with our environment. Taking in energy and matter, and we're expelling it. But in a closed system, things cool off, things disperse, energy spreads out. This is not a problem for Christians. But why is it not a problem for Christians? Because we know God created and began the universe, and there will be an end. It says in 2 Peter that elements will melt. And that takes an outside action on the universe to do that. But if there is no creator, the first law defines the universe as eternal. Energy or matter are not destroyed or created. So before the Big Bang, whatever was in that marble-sized mass that exploded, that was all the mass of the universe. That's what they're saying. Scientists say, when they measure the microwaves in the universe 16 billion years ago, the Big Bang, everything that was in the universe was compacted into something about the size of a marble. I wonder how they know that it was the size of a marble and not the size of a golf ball or a baseball. Or just one planet. I mean, considering the size of the universe, that would be believable, that it was the size of a planet, super dense. But it was about the size of a marble, they say. And then I wonder, why not a little bit smaller? Why not smaller yet? Why not down to just about nothing? What's to stop you from saying, well, they're describing what they see is really a result of, and God said, let there be light. And the universe was created. He created the heavens and the earth. So, if there is no God, if there is no creator, that energy and that matter had to continuously have existed before, and if it were so, it would have, based on how long eternity is, it would have already dispersed. It wouldn't have come together and then had a big explosion. It would have already dispersed. They might argue that. I don't know. I don't know if the laws of gravity might pull everything together again or something, but it's not what we observe right now in the world. So the second law says if it were eternal, it would have gone to complete entropy, which is complete dispersion of all energy evenly throughout the universe. And obviously not. A book or DNA are examples of organization. Even our class manual here, it's got pictures and letters and organized ink on the pages and everything, so you can get information from that. And DNA is certainly an example of organization. So the Big Bang doesn't explain the dilemma of how we got to here. It actually complicates it. The Big Bang kind of says that everything exploded and went out and dispersed, but it doesn't explain how things came together to form something as complex as DNA. God explains it. Another problem is contingency. Why are the laws of nature the way they are? I think this was the question that you were asking earlier about, or noting that, about morality or anything, but the laws of nature also, we have to ask, why does gravity work? Why is there gravity? Why aren't they different? There has to be something outside of the laws of nature, outside of gravity, just like morally we would say, there has to be something outside of what our thoughts are to say what's evil, what's good. The laws of nature, we don't know why gravity is. We just observe it that it is. There isn't anything the laws depend on or that govern the laws of nature. There's nothing for them to be contingent upon. So it's really easy to postulate imaginary time, other dimensions, and say that was a beginning, but it still doesn't explain the beginning of gravity, or the beginning of... We have no idea, no way of going back and finding out what that other dimension was like and what natural laws functioned then. And that takes a lot more faith than believing in God. There isn't anything the laws depend on or that governs them. It's only observable, and here's the key, it's not rational. There's not a way of explaining why it has to be that way. They can explain maybe through quantum physics why gravity works, and things are attracted to each other, matter and mass is attracted to itself. They can explain that. I'm glad it works. That's why I'm standing on the floor and not bouncing off the ceiling. But it doesn't explain why it has to be that way.
I like the phrase, laws don't cause. Laws don't cause anything. They just describe how things are.
Yeah, laws of nature.
A law of gravity doesn't cause gravity.
No.
The law didn't presuppose gravity, or pre-exist gravity rather.
Yeah.
The law of gravity just demonstrates
describes
how gravity, once it exists,
yes,
interacts with
it's
material.
An observation.
Exactly.
It's not a rationale.
Observational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a couple other things about the origin of the universe is I don't want you thinking, I don't believe in a literal translation of the Bible. I believe in a literal, in the literal sense of literary, the intended meaning in writing it. So Genesis 1 really is, it's One, it's from the earth's perspective. So it really wouldn't have been possible for God to reveal to Moses in terms that no one would have understood, because no one just, it's not in our mindset to think outside the universe. We're not capable of that. So it's from the earth's perspective, and then it's literary, it's poetic, it's not written as a scientific thesis, even though it does correlate to what science has discovered. We're not saying that man was created and he's floating around in space, so God created some animals but they couldn't help him, so he created plants for the animals and man to eat, and then on the backs of 4 elephants created the rest of the world. So, the earth is not the dead body of one of the gods after a great war in the heavens. No, it's in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And this could be a summary statement of the whole process. Well, I would assume that the heavens and the earth, it's a way of saying everything that exists. And then he said the first thing he created was light, but he didn't create the sun and the moon and the stars until the 4th day. So it may be just from a human perspective, earth perspective, in a literary and poetic way, and created light and the luminaries in the heavens. He created, he separated the waters from the waters, and he created the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. He created all the dry land and the plants, and he created land animals and humans to be on the land. There's a parallelism that's really obvious there. But we're not going to try and prove scientific facts from the Bible, but we're not going to try and prove the Bible either from scientific facts. We're going to take the Bible for what it's saying, and it definitely says God created the heavens and the earth. And it puts it in terms that they would be able to understand and communicate at that time. But the Bible teaches that God, as a Trinity, created the universe. Why do I say as a Trinity? Because it mentions the word there. God said, "Let there be light." In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Let's go to Genesis. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, scientifically, it may not have been H2O, but it was, how do you explain this in terms that they would understand? And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening, there was morning, the first day. And we already get a sense for the rhythm, the poetry of it. Not that it's just poetry, but it does definitely ascribe all creation to God. And we're not going to get into arguments about literal days, 24-hour periods, or a day is as 1,000 years. I don't think there's reasonable justification to say that this is describing an evolutionary process or anything like that. I think He created man in His image. That's what this is saying. It's not leaving room for a lot of other interpretation according to scientific, or not really scientific, according to theories of man. I'll just say that. So John, the Son, John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then 3 and 4, do you have that handy?
Yeah, I can pull it up, no problem.
Oh, I got it here. John, and it says, "All things were made through Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made." So Christ was there. "In Him was life, and the life was the light of men." So Christ was there in the beginning also. And then we also have 1 Corinthians 8:6. Colossians. These are not necessarily ways that we would be able to tell a secular humanist where the world came from. But once we establish that their explanation leaves a lot of holes and they want to know, then we could go to 1 Corinthians. We could show that throughout Scripture. Basically, this is showing throughout Scripture, this is one worldview held over thousands of years, at least in Scripture. Yet for us, there is one God, the Father, from whom all things are all things, and for whom we exist. That is a powerful statement. For whom we exist. That gives all meaning to our life. We exist for Him. And one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and through whom we exist. Colossians 1:15 to 17. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, speaking of Christ. For by Him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through Him and for Him. And maybe they understood the laws of nature and things like that as spiritual entities, or maybe they are. Maybe it's a spiritual reality that is holding everything together. Hebrews 1:3, He sustains the everything, the universe, by the word of His power. Speaking of Christ, God has spoken through His Son, whom He sustains. And then also the Spirit was there. One in Genesis 1:2, and the Spirit hovered over the face of the waters. We can go to Job, the book of Job, and chapter 33. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. Psalms 104 and verse 30. When you send forth your Spirit, they are created. You renew the face of the ground. Creation by God was so important in Moses' time and before to correct pantheism. That there were a lot of gods and everything was God. It was to correct the pagan beliefs of their time, not to correct the scientific beliefs of our time. So we have to be careful about that. When we do that, we don't try and say and become scientists, and then try and say that the Bible is saying giving scientific data. No, it's ascribing logically, it's ascribing literarily, and it really ascribing creation to God, but in battling all the other gods, or the idea that the other gods created, that there were many gods. And it really isn't that much different than what's going on in people's mindsets nowadays. Other gods are really just their own mind is their God. They think that they're good enough to figure it all out. So we have to see that God created everything ex nihilo, which is out of nothing. And that's a necessity of science also. That's a necessity of science, that everything had to come from nothing, and that's where they can't explain the original cause. And this speaks to the sovereignty of God. That God is the source of the existence of everything gives Him the right. He is the source of all. All that is good, all of creation is good. He said it was very good. It's from Him. And that also makes Him the only one worthy of worship. And that's really what comes down to, is science is stealing worship from God. It's elevating the mind of man to that place. No other is worthy of worship. No other created good. The creator-creature relationship is different from the creature-creature relationship. That's an important distinction to hold when you're talking about this, because a lot of times they will judge God like He's another part of creation. Like my neighbor that asked me, well, who created God? He thought he had me there. Who created God? Well, no, that's the distinction between the whole universe, including us, and God. God is the only one that wasn't created, that's eternal and always existed. And that's what the Bible teaches. And that relationship of ours to God, or of the creation to God, or the laws of gravity to the God who created the universe and said, I'm going to do it this way, and this is how it's going to be, that gives us the rationale and the meaning for it. Creatures are dependent. The created things, including us, we're dependent on that Creator. But we're real, and we're good. Creation is good. 2 Corinthians 5:17 talks about, I am a new creation. He uses that word, new creature, is really a new creation. I've been created again. It creates those who fell from this relationship. And that explains evil. When you have God Creator, it's coherent with evil is when you fall out of relationship. What was the phrase you used, Eric? To say it was
wrongs get in the way, you're disconnected.
You're disconnected.
Spiritual death is disconnection.
Spiritual death is disconnection in that relationship with God, with your Creator. And that explains evil. Evil is what God created the potential for in giving us free will. And I remember 6th grade, I was asking this question. If God is all-powerful, why couldn't He have created a universe in which we had free will, but we wouldn't sin? That's a big question, especially for a 6th grader.
Maybe such a world isn't in the possible world configuration.
We'll probably be, I think I'll ask him when we get there. I think I'll ask him. But really, yeah, that's a question. But it's at the same time you have to say, well, God is sovereign. He created, so He knows best. And it's not just a resignation that, whatever, He knows best. It's a faith in that there really is a reason that He created things the way they are, and that is the best way. And we can't consider every possibility of the way things could have been. We can't even consider things how they would have been otherwise. We get into storytelling there.
I think C.S. Lewis said we have to take reality as it comes to us, not as we would have it.
God creates in freedom to choose, and with purpose and love. That's what we get from the Bible. God creates in freedom. He tells them, don't eat of that tree. He doesn't put a fence around the tree. He just creates, he creates the possibility, that freedom, but it's with purpose and it's with love. And this gives meaning and value to life. And here's another one. The rational unity of the universe is by God. The fact that the laws of nature function everywhere in the universe. You don't go to Australia and find out that gravity doesn't work down there, let alone on the moon. It's explainable by the relative size of the moon that the gravity is less. You can see rational laws functioning everywhere. It's observable. There's order. There's rationality in the universe, and it's imposed by God. That, remember we were talking about, there's no rationale for why things are the way they are if you don't believe in God. But it requires that you believe in God, something outside the universe that imposed that. And those can be discovered by science. They have been discovered by science. So everything that science is discovering, it's great. It's great. Keep going. But make sure it's science and not just theories. The contingent freedom of the universe. This is the universe depending on Him and not Him on the universe. We have to have this mindset. This is what the Bible teaches about God. We are not subject to other powers, to futility, to an interminable cycle. It has a beginning and it has an end, and that gives meaning to our lives. The contingent freedom of the universe is that God created it, and so it depends on Him to start it and to bring it to an end, and for it to all make sense and function. And this may be what it's referring to in Hebrews 1, where it says, "In the Son sustains the eons." He sustains all time periods, the whole universe, by the word of His power. So we'll stop there, and hopefully we can get through some of these others 2 weeks from now when we come